the clinician said, I don't need to see you every month.
We want to be the most omni-channel driven company in the world.
There is this practice when you can shadow customers, when you can spend 1-2 days with them to really understand them.
Measurement basically driving you down the wrong direction.
And I think that's a very uncomfortable truth, but we're all guilty of that.
Don't let the bastards get you down.
They were just happy people in this advertising. This was a story of happy people surviving cancer.
Espresso experience.
Thank you very much, everybody, for joining our breakfast, which is for most of us in the afternoon, but I hope you have a good coffee at hand. Again, we want to have quality time together. I don't do a long introduction and I hand over to Rich immediately, and then let's see where that drives us. And I will state here for the recording that all our opinions are our own. Enjoy your coffee, and over to Rich. Thanks, Rich.
Wow. Thank you. Thank you, Michal, and to you and Christian and the entire Screver team for inviting me to host. And as I started off, I've got to meet almost everybody here, or everybody here except for Duncan in the real world. But this is not about a talking head or slides. It's 7 people sitting having coffee together, or 6 people. Are we at 6? 6, which is exciting. And I'm glad to be here with everyone. Quick round of intros and where you're from. I think everybody knows everybody, but then let's get started.
So my name is Ksenia. I'm the Global Customer Engagement Head in Oncology Business Unit at Pierre Fabre, and I'm based in Paris.
I'm Nico. I'm a product manager for B1 Medicines in Switzerland, overseeing solid and heme. And yes, I'm also very much looking forward to the discussions and hearing different perspectives during this coffee meeting.
Hello. So Duncan Welling, based in the UK. I know Rich and Michal and the team at Screver because I've been leading a global kind of voice of customer CX metrics rollout. Great to meet you all, and thank you for the invite.
And Christian, please.
With pleasure. Christian Clifton, being based in the Basel area, have been strategic lead for digital customer experience at Roche Pharma. Last project was designing and deploying the Roche Pharma Voice of the Customer program and deploying it to more than 60 countries worldwide. And being a passionate, the patient is the customer advocate.
Fantastic. So we're here today to talk about oncology and the experience that experiences that are unfolding in the field. And we called it The Emperor Strikes Back in homage to Dr. Mukherjee's book, The Emperor of All Maladies, which is an incredible book kind of about the history of cancer. But there was a line in it that we shared in the video that cancer is not only a disease, but an ecosystem of fear and waiting and logistics and decisions, financial burden, hope and despair. So I was curious if we just go around to start the conversation in a few words. If we take that notion about cancer being an ecosystem, what does that notion require from the companies, from manufacturers like yourselves, in how your field is meeting with clinicians?
Okay, I dare to start representing a company which has a strong pillar in specific fields of oncology. I think if you're working in oncology, you learn one thing very quickly. You're not just providing a drug.
Yeah.
So there is an impact on the patient, which needs to be managed by the physician in circumstances of the disease, but also in the circumstances, let's say under therapeutic circumstances. There's also an impact. And there's an impact on patients' life, on patients' families' life, and also being someone who had cases in my own family, I know very exactly what it means. And this is, for me, very special in oncology.
Maybe to build on what Christian has shared, I think what also plays a crucial role is building effective partnership with the oncology community, because providing the medicine itself is not enough. And there are many friction points in terms of the care delivery, and our role as the life science companies is team up with the physicians to help to address those friction points so that patients would be tested in time, would get the right treatment at the right time, and they would get the support along their treatment journey. Richard, you were mentioning about fear, and I think we all can acknowledge that the level of fear and uncertainty the patients operated under is extremely high. And the support of the patient goes also beyond the actual medicine, but the actual support and follow-up in which many different healthcare professionals play a role.
Yeah, and Duncan or Nico, how do you How do you see all of that folding out inside of the responsibilities and the opportunities with the field?
I think it's sort of interesting that we are having this conversation in relation to a technology that is voice of customer, because I think it's certainly, the ecosystem you talk about is one where the definition of customer gets stretched to absolute breaking point. It's not like customer in any direction that you would have in other areas where a technology like this may be deployed. I think there isn't a straightforward answer to that, but it's certainly something that needs a very specific approach and consideration.
Maybe something that is special in oncology, at least in my perception, is it is highly scientific and is very, very complex. I think if you look at the evolution of cancer therapies over the last 20 years, it's increasingly complex and there's so many subpopulations. So it's more and more difficult for anyone really to understand, even lung cancer, just to name one entity. Like, it's impossible to know it all, and it's gonna get worse all the time. So I think this level of complexity is really special. And then what I think is the flip side of this is, while we talk about science and populations and statistics all day long in our ivory towers, aka our offices, the reality of physicians is then you have this one patient in front of you. And so that's such a stark contrast between, you always look at large samples to really run clinical trials, but then in the end, it is one story, and all of us, as we speak here, probably have a relative, a friend, a family member, whoever that was affected by cancer, and then you out of a sudden don't think in hazard ratios or statistics anymore, but it's really like, I don't know, your stepdad or your friend or whatsoever. And I think that emotional twist, the science and then emotional individual journeys is really special to me in oncology.
Yeah. So you're talking about, and I think everybody talked about it to an extent, the customer's customer. So the oncologist, the hospital system, the oncology nurses are the customer we're calling on, but they have a customer sitting in front of them. They have a customer sitting in front of them or in the waiting room or about to come in for the next appointment who is facing something life altering. What is the role of the field in that? Does the field have a role in that, or could the field, or should the field have a role in that?
Maybe just to add, because I remember a study that I read where oncologists were asked, what you would like to see from a pharma company. And interesting enough, of course, there was the products, but it was more about the human factor, right? To say, hey, I have nurses, they are burned out. How should I manage that? I have patients and I just have 3 minutes with them to explain them a deadly disease. So very much, the human factor, and to just loop to the field and the field force, the people they see in a time where they have no time to waste. It's again a human factor, which is key to the experience that they have with the pharma company.
Yes, just building on what you just said, and this triggered a thought also Nico before. I think Nico precisely nailed it, saying oncology is a highly scientific field. So whoever is in the field and talking to the physicians, to our primary customer, the B2B customer, they need to speak the same language. And this might be not exactly the same to the same level of depth in other areas in pharma, and certainly not in other industries. But then there's another challenge. And I think some people in the field might have realized, and this is what you are touching, it's about the trust level. So there is a kind of a paradigm in pharma commercial, which says we build on exclusivity. The myth is, if we have exclusivity, there is no competition, and we are anyhow selling our product, and this is wrong. Because especially in oncology, there is a competition, and this competition is not going on track because people don't. They're afraid of the side effects. They're afraid of pharma. They might be afraid of pharma as selling not the right things. They might be afraid of the impact of the therapy on their life. And they go into the woods and they're dancing around the trees, for example, and which is a fair approach at the end of the day. But sometimes, so I met physicians, I met doctors who were highly frustrated around it. And you nailed it, Michal. You said it's about time for building trust and creating an understanding of what is the right thing to do.
Yeah, there is another quote from Dr. Mukherjee's book that cancer begins and ends with people. Doctors treat disease, but they also treat people. And this precondition of their profession sometimes pulls them into different directions. So they not only have the science to deal with, but they also have a human on the other side to deal with. I'm just curious, is that the rep's role? Could that be the rep's role?
I think considering oncology is that complex and very much scientific, the expectation for our engagement being scientifically credible and backed up by the relevant scientific information that helps physicians to drive their decision making, this is foundational. But in addition to that, I think oncology also requires this human element in terms of the experience, which means that our interaction should feel that each interaction respects the time that HCPs have, that it respects the context of the physicians, of the patient population, or the patient in front of them, their practice, but also expertise and the operational realities in that practice. So the interaction, besides being scientific, should feel empathetic and super precise to knowing what physician goes through when the right patient comes in front of him or her.
I find it personally interesting that all of us basically jump on helping patients navigate fear, uncertainty, and difficulties, depending on the indication you're working in. That is certainly true. This is one major pillar of the job of a good oncologist. But I would dare to claim the problem that this cannot be done always in practice is coming from administrative burdens or the time pressure, as you mentioned, Xenia. So I read a publication the other day that was from, I think, 2021, and literally like only 60 or 70% of the time they can actually dedicate to patients, because they, at least living in Germany, you see that every day, need to print out things, fill in 3 or 4 different systems, and then they're lacking the time to actually do what's important. I feel like if you look at the root cause, it maybe is not the one that is most present here.
But it depends how you define burden, doesn't it? That's an open word in terms of where the emotional weight sits of the role versus where the time pressure. They are different things. I suspect that's probably why everyone has lent into that particular thing, because from an emotional weight point of view, that's clearly the area that is ultimately the reason why they do what they do.
Yeah, yes, I was going to start with a bit of a case study, but we moved right into the conversation. And in that particular case, science was on everyone's side, right? We were working with a medication with a team, and all the competitors had great science on their side. And our notion was, well, what if we flipped who our competitor was? Like, our competitor is certainly the disease, but what if our competitor was something more like, how do we show up? Are we competing with how the teams show up? Are they helpful? Are they organized? Are they understanding this customer's needs? And the thing that I found, and I'd love your feedback on it, was that sounds amazing, right? That sounds like, we need to compete on the actual experience. When it came down to the practicality of it, the reps struggled with it. The reps were like, of course I'm helpful. Of course I'm great. I go in there, I delivered the 4 messages I was told to deliver, and they should prescribe because that's what marketing told me. And that was hard. Why do we think that is hard for a rep? Do we think it's because of what they're measured on and what they're tasked with? Tell me, Christian, you're laughing.
Yes, just yes. I remember that a couple of years ago, we honest moment, I don't know where this ended up because I stepped out a little bit. We changed the way how we measured the field force impact or performance. So KPIs for the field force from number of knocked doors a year to something else. And I can tell you that at the end of that year, I asked a colleague who has been a field force colleague and asked him, well, how did it go? And he said, yeah, you know what? There's the official metrics, but if I'm entering my boss office at the end of the year for the end of year review, his first question is, how many doors did you knock? So I think, yes, metrics is key, but there's also kind of a behavioral thing. There's a kind of a cultural thing. And believe me, I hate this. We always blaming the culture and saying we need to change the culture. This doesn't make it alone, but thinking needs to change. So how do we effectively measure the real impact in the market? And I'm not talking about being nice or so. No, really business impact in the market based on what we do. And I think this is something where we can get closer to what happens. And voice of the customer is a great, you know me. I'm a big fan of it because I have experienced that, especially with field force, it works. It works pretty well. Full stop. A series of anecdotes. If you just allow me one tiny little story, because this was my original opener, let's say eye opener for how important the customers and the patient's voice is. I was asked to give a presentation as a medical leaders program they run at Roche. This is a few years ago. I was new to Roche myself. And I said, no, I'm not going to present customer experience and this stuff on a series of slides. I want to make it a little bit more, real. So I invited a colleague who was a colleague and who was a cancer patient. And guess what? I had some cards with questions and I could throw away those cards after 2 minutes because what she told us was so different from our coordinate system of what we were focusing on. She said two things. One was, well, she was in the US and she saw kind of a big advertising. And I think for people being based in Europe, it was anyhow new that for some pharmaceutical products, you can have TV advertising in the US, which would be impossible in Europe. And she said, they were just happy people in this advertising. This was a story of happy people surviving cancer. And she said, this was not her reality. And she said, they were just happy people in this advertising. This was a story of happy people surviving cancer. It was not her day-to-day, what she experienced day-to-day. And then she went on therapy and she was in the hospital. And she said, and then someone by Roche, or Genentech in that case, showed up and was dropping a bundle of information leaflet package. And she said it was great information. It was nicely done. It was perfectly designed. It was easy to understand. It was explaining the scientific background, rational effectiveness, and so on and so on. But those have not been my questions. My question was not how effective is the treatment. My question was, how long do I need to suffer from the side effects and what will be the impact on my social life? And I think there we fail. Full stop. We still in 2026 we fail.
So nobody's closer to the customer, the physician customer, the nurse customer, the oncology team customer than the rep. And nobody's closer to the ultimate customer than the aforementioned people. What is our experience or what should we do to break out of, here's our omni-channel message that we can push out and put in all these places in front of them to leverage the field to be a force for insights? What should we do? What is anyone doing right now that is effective?
I can't answer that question necessarily, but I can sort of talk a little bit about the challenge, which is the relationship that pharma has with customers and with the space it operates in is a very carefully controlled one for very good reason. It has to be a very structured and governed way of engaging. But if you come to the other end, the ecosystem of cancer you've talked about, the patient experience, that's a deeply personal one. And that is something that is not going to be the same everywhere. And it's not going to require the same things everywhere. And you have that tension, a tension that is there for very good reason because it controls a kind of commercial entity's role within an environment that is distinctly uncommercial from the sort of experience of those at the sharp end of it. How do you build a governed system to do something in a space which is ultimately deeply personal and very ungovernable in terms of the end experience? And then how do you measure it without coming to sort of very surface level metrics of doors knocked and material delivered or clicked on or read or And that's the challenge. And I don't think anyone has a perfect answer to that. I think there are better and worse ways of doing it, but there's a good reason why the challenge exists. So I leave that there.
Now, it's largely regulatory, right? It's what we're required to do and it's what approved. And while the physician can ask the patient when they're diagnosed, tell me something in your life that you're looking forward to and let's make sure you get to that moment. That's not our job. That's not what we can do. But understanding the physician is in that moment. Somebody opened up, Michal, you said earlier that physician was like, help me relieve the burden on my practice. They're burned out. Can we do that as an industry?
I mean, there's also a bunch of regulations that define what you can do and what you cannot do. I mean, you cannot just deliver any benefits. Most countries are regulated in that regard. But what I would put on the table here is a very simple thing. If you want to get the burden off physicians' backs, the first thing is we need to admit we're part of that burden to a certain extent, because every email you send that is not necessary or that is not relevant or repetitive is an email that takes, and if it's only 5 seconds away from a physician's day, and that's 5 seconds per company, per indication that a physician can see a patient. And I think that's a very uncomfortable truth, but we're all guilty of that to more or less extent. But I think starting with that really, and I personally believe, especially as a marketer or as a sales rep, MSL, all these customer facing roles, you have a responsibility to really deliver relevant information when it's required. And you need to be mindful of people's time. And I think that's a very cheesy thing to say, and it's very simple. But if we would do that, that would already solve a lot of problems. I'm convinced.
That's interesting because in the example that I mentioned earlier, one of the pieces of feedback that came through that was really hard for everyone, it came through the field asking clinicians. The clinician said, I don't need to see you every month. I don't. Unless you have something new or remarkable or amazing for me, I don't need to see you every month. Yet we're measuring our reps on a certain cadence with physicians. And I put in the chat, Goddard's law, when a measure becomes your target, it's no longer a good measure. But we're dealing with fiefdoms and silos and departments. How do we bridge that?
And I think to your point, Richard, about the physician saying that they don't need to see us every month, for instance, when there is no data. From my side, I can say that it's not unique to oncology. In my past experience, I've heard that from other specialties as well. And to the earlier point, I think, Michal, you mentioned that it's not that much connected to the reps, but I think our business strategy and how do we define success overall in our business. If our success solely is focused on the business numbers and targets and not connected very much to the outcomes and to the helpfulness to the customers. There are many ways how to do that. And I think in this forum, we have at least a number of people who implemented different type of measures, right? Then we receive what you put in the chat that what is measured, right? So it gets attention then in the end. So I think we should start expanding our focus from the frequency, from the persuasion of customers towards more, how can we enable them in their daily job? And how can we make sure that every interaction to the point of Nico is super relevant to them and their context and brings them value?
There is that quote, I think it's attributed to Peter F. Drucker or something, but possibly wrongly, which is that which is measured gets managed. But the full quote is that which gets measured gets managed, even when it harms the purpose of the organization to do so, or something like that. The full thing is actually a warning about measurement basically driving you down the wrong direction.
Let me ask a provocative question now that I have 3 or potentially 5 measuring and NCX experts in front of me. To your point that if you set the wrong incentive, then people do stupid things just to follow a KPI. So many pharma companies had this nice omnichannel vision that they wanted to have the nicest HCP portal ever and that people will spend hours there, just like it with Netflix. So if I tomorrow send an email to a physician and they have an update about a new indication, if I'm following a KPI that they need to be as long on that email or on the web page as possible, do I write a really long email and consume more time, or do I just write 3 sentences, inform them about a new indication, they can move on after 5 seconds, and my goal is basically to inform them this indication is new. So I think we're having a structural problem here because the more you can measure, the more you will measure, and the more people are obsessed with measuring things. And sometimes I'm asking myself, would it be better if we just stopped measuring and just did whatever the people who see customers know is right or feel is right? Do we really lose that much potential by measuring, by not measuring?
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on that? I mean, it's a bit, I'm exaggerating, of course, but
You're not. Time on metrics, operational metrics like time on site. Like I worked at one time for the leading healthcare portal globally, and they wanted more page views, so they started to stretch the content out across multiple pages because the ads, it was ad supported, so the ads would show up on the page view. So yes, you could give them the answer in one sentence, but we need 4 pages because we're selling ads on the pages. It's the wrong incentive, and that's why I think asking why. And do you want a website? I asked a question in a meeting recently. What if your website went completely away? It can't. Okay. What if it was 1 page? What would you put on it? I think challenging the organization and having those hard conversations. Anyone else?
This is it. Just think about Nico spoke about all those channel metrics, digital metrics. I wouldn't go so far. By the way, Nico said we should stop any measuring because it's more measuring the right thing and as less as possible. There, I'm completely with you, but I would like to run into projects or an organization that doesn't know actually, it has no proof of what's coming out at the end. I think we're just looking at the wrong thing. think about omnichannel, the big hype in pharma over the last, I don't know, 5, 6, 10 years. If you look how those things are defined, how the outcomes are defined, we want to be the most omnichannel driven company in the world. We want to have the best omnichannel system in pharma. This is not the right answer to the why, because we are not a digital company. Omnichannel is just a tool. It's a way reaching the final why, and this is having more trusted, better relationships with our customers. We want to have the final whys. We want to have more and better business, independent if we have the best omnichannel of the world. But this is what typically happens. We build then those projects, and those projects have their KPIs, and they are developing a little bit their own life. And no one really looks at what is the final outcome at the end. I would have one big advice or proposal, suggestion, if you allow me. Ask your affiliates. So all my global colleagues who might listen to that now, please be polite and be kind with me, but listen to your affiliates. They are close to the customer. They know what might be better to do instead of global organizations having a much more difficult journey on getting the right answer to the why.
Yeah.
And the field force very often knows already, and they might sometimes be accidentally fenced by a system that isn't set up in the most effective way.
Are they afraid, do you think, in organizations then, Christian? Like, what if we gave the field a voice, right? We're giving the customer a voice, tell us these things about your experience with us, but giving the field a voice, are they afraid to be honest with marketing and their bosses? Like, hey, these materials that you're giving us, nobody wants them, nobody cares.
Perhaps. Sometimes I see, and this would be the message to colleagues in the affiliates, be bold. I mean, I've been in discussions with colleagues in the affiliates where I sense a little bit of hesitance of sharing bad experiences because, they are speaking to the big global. Who cares? It's about doing the right things. You guys, you are at the front line to the customer. You need to tell us what are the right things. Be bold, speak up. Especially with the field force, I can tell you when we started the VOC program at Roche and we started to deploy to trailblazing affiliates. We were afraid of hesitance by field force on being measured on customer feedback. So if I'm a colleague in the field and the customer is saying I'm not giving the right thing, how does this impact my performance review? I think we found smart ways to solve it, to find right ways that this is not as high as people were afraid of. And what we've seen is that field force realize that sometimes the customer voice can be something that can speak on behalf of them. Because I make it short. When I'm sitting in a business meeting with my colleagues and Christian is sitting there and saying something, it's my Christian's Roche voice of 10 Roche colleagues. But if I have a bunch of customer voices, I put it on the table. This is not my opinion. This is not Christian's opinion. This is what customers say. And I see a huge opportunity here to get the reality into the marketing strategy and planning.
Contentment that it is all, or not all, but it is a lot about change management, right? And what you, Xenia, just wrote in the chat, right? To be okay with negative feedback as well, to not just ask, your good buddy customers or your good buddy sales reps or your good buddy marketing people about feedback, but because in the end, what you want in change management and a transformation or in an innovation is to learn, right? To learn, to get insights that help you to transform. Yes, of course, business, but also how your customers experience your company or your beyond the pill setup. So, yeah.
And it is that openness and willing to receive that openness. And we're going into planning season, most of big pharma, right? Everybody's entering into annual planning, setting budgets and strategies for next year. What I have been shocked by, in most cases, the voice of the customer is not in those rooms. The voice of the agency, right? The voice of the consultancy, not so much the voice of the field. The voice of the marketeers is in the room. The voice of medical is in the room, but not as much the voice of the customer. What do we do to bring that in to the room? Or is anybody already doing that?
I don't know if I can answer Rich's recent question, but it's more in relation to the previous discussion. So, change management is great. It's an important part of getting anything rolled out. But I think if we go back to the original point about the website or the email, the time on site being the metric, and that means that you try and keep people on a website for as long as possible. What you're actually talking about there is like structurally embedded incentives. Once it is someone's job to run a particular website, and they've been given certain metrics that they have to meet in order to prove their worth, there's no change management that's going to get them to just hold their hands up and go, what I'm working on isn't any value. It's offering no value to this. Let's delete it. Let's take it out and let's crack on. Unless they're very sure that they've got something to go to next. There are very brief moments where someone's going to be very honest about that. So often it feels like tracing the cord back to the wall, it's like the problem is embedded in the structure and the incentives of a thing. If you want to change it, you're going to have to go all the way to the structure. And that's a challenge that goes well beyond kind of change management and rollout. I don't know what anybody else's experience of that are, but I often find that the reason why something can't happen, and I'm not speaking of my sort of recent experiences, just career long, is because it's embedded in the structure and incentives of a system.
There's a saying a man or woman convinced against his will is of the same opinion still. So yeah, nice. Just because you give incentives and people follow to not getting scolded with doesn't mean they intrinsically change the way they think about something. To all of those points, because Rich, you were asking, how do you bring the voice of the customer into a room? Honestly, and again, maybe this is way too simple and obvious, but I think it all starts with just listening and trusting people when they tell you. I've seen both in organizations I work, but also with colleagues in the industry I talk to, I've heard many stories where sometimes people who experience something have a perception or an opinion, they share it, and then this is getting questioned by people who are not in that room. And that works both ways, global, local, local, global. Like we always have our own experiences and so on. And then it's a question of, if you hire people, you probably hire the best profiles around and you hire them to do a job. So trust them to do a job and listen to what they have to say, because, I'm a product manager. If I don't trust my customer facing colleagues, and I know better because I sit in my ivory tower of theories and clinical study publications, what's the point of this? I have people who experience it every day. They tell me A and I think it's B. If I have no solid reason to believe that they might have a biased set of experiences or feedbacks, like if I see a totally different picture in digital trends or at conferences than what I hear from them, okay, then you can still have a conversation. But if you have no other data, why would I not listen and just assume they're the best in their jobs? They have the best intentions. And that's it. I think that trust in the organization internally, but also externally working is the base of everything. And measure all you want. But if you ask for statistics, you'll always get them. If you ask for, as Christian said, knocking doors, you will get them. Whatever number you put on that, you will get the number. And I think, that all comes down to trust and listening. It's a very simple, maybe not very much rocket science, but I truly believe that's how a healthy team works, and that's how you bring voices indirectly into a room. Might it be customer voices, might it be your colleagues' voices, because also working in global, your goal should be to bring the voice of all product managers on the globe into a room. So it's always the same mechanism.
Yeah, so I'll give a plug to this book, Unreasonable Hospitality, and this is the field guide. If you've not read it, I would encourage you to read Unreasonable Hospitality first, and then the field guide is just practically how do you apply it. But I posted this question in the invitation, and it opens the book, which is, what would you attempt to do if you knew you could not fail? And in the time we have remaining, which has gone faster than I would have thought, I'd love to go around and understand, if you knew you couldn't, what is it you try? What is it you do in your organization to make these changes we've spoken? It's a big question. It's thorny.
Okay, I tried. That I have the ultimate answer, at least what I'm saying to the people I'm working with in my teams or collaborators across, is fear is a bad advisor. Full stop. Stop thinking about if we can do something, start thinking about how we can do it. So don't use compliance, regulatory expectations as a bad excuse for laziness. I don't know how many times I've heard in my professional life, no, we can't do that. before I did it. So there is a kind of a way of being in the comfort zone of, well, this is how it always worked. This is how it continues to work. And if I'm doing my job, I'm fine. And I'm closing the loop back to what was said before. It's all the way about how do we measure business performance, market impact, and customer happiness at the end of the day. And I hope that with the BOC program at Roche and the metric associated with it, we have started. The issue is here a little bit, you need to be patient because first you need to collect some customer feedbacks before you can show it to the marketeers, right? So don't overpromise too early. Then, yeah, Nico nailed it. So just listen and learn. What can I see? It's no rocket science.
Just to hop on something that Christian said, in a side note, I think measuring happiness could also be misleading, because if I have somebody treating with a drug that is outdated since 10 years and I tell them you're doing wrong, that doesn't necessarily feel good. So if I measure the day after my customer's happiness, probably it got worse, but it's the right thing to do. So it's always, as you said, about measuring the right things. And I've always been, to the question, what would I do differently if none of the prior history existed? I would love to see a conference without any conference booths and marketing colors. I know this is bizarre and it's not going to happen, but I really would like that. Like, just, everybody gets the same standard. You're talking about science only. Maybe this is a scientist in me speaking, but I would find that interesting. I know it's not going to happen, but
And I would do more co-creation with customers and patients. And if the regulation would allow, shadowing them as well. Outside of pharma, there is such practice when we can shadow patients in their typical environments in order to understand what it is to be in their shoes. And the same with patients, actually. Understanding what it is to live with cancer helps us to elevate our empathy and enrich our understanding of the patient journey.
So I think we all work at different levels of abstraction from the ultimate kind of customer, or the sharp end of a market. I sort of hear people on this call who are closer to the product side. I'm personally almost one or two steps back at more of a kind of technology capability enablement. So I have customers, they have customers, they have customers. So I think we're all going to have slightly different sort of structural challenges that we're navigating. But one thing does resonate, which is that sort of proceeding without fear, being less fearful of, just fearful generally, but also less constrained by sort of structural or pre-existing systems. I would love to work in an environment, and I think many people would love to work in an environment where it was possible to sit down, spend more time writing on the wall, and know that it isn't theatre, that it is something that is has a fairly good shot at being turned into something kind of real that has direct impact. So being able to run experiments. But I also know that there are enormous challenges around that. We are a highly regulated space, very complicated, and there are reasons why it doesn't always feel that way. And that is what you accept by working in this space.
Yeah. And there was a slide that I was going to open with that I hid about moonshots, right? And we try to push our organizations to be brave and to take moonshots, and everybody wants to take the shortcut to the easy place. And you might not get to the moon, but you might get halfway.
But equally, you wouldn't want to move fast and break things in a space like this.
Right. Well, giving people that safety net to kind of challenge convention and press things is really hard. And it's particularly hard when you have the tyranny of the quarter hanging over your shoulder, right? Like, you've got to make a number this quarter. Well, that safe thing that we did before got us closest. Let's do that safe thing again. And that's where we get challenged. I can't believe we've run out of time so quickly. I'm incredibly grateful for everybody's contributions and openness. And we're going to do this again. And we'd love some of your feedback on topics and on guests and on how this was for you and what we can do better and things we can break and help the industry break. So if you have a moment to provide some feedback, but any closing words, anyone?
I promise we will listen to your feedback. Thank you very much.
The espresso was really energizing, so I'll share from my side, and it indeed flew like 10 minutes. So I wish we could have more time and to further develop the conversation. It was really interesting. Thank you.
That's always a nice thing about talking to peers in the industry, even though you don't share credentials, obviously, but you get a sense that you're not alone with your challenges and we all are in the same boat in a way. So thanks for having me.
A great conversation. I think lots of familiar themes. I haven't sat in the same rooms as you guys, but I can imagine some of them based on what we're talking
And
about.
don't stop. If you're convinced doing the right things, don't stop. Sometimes you might have to do it over and over and over and over and over again. But as Rich says before, at least getting halfway forward is a big step forward. Is a leap. Then this espresso reminded me of that. Thank you very much to all of you.
Yeah. I'll quote Rihanna to close out. Don't let the bastards get you down.